continue. Okay. All right, so before we get into Expressionism and Abstract Expressionism, let's talk about how we discuss art. All right, now sometimes we'll see these terms and you'll see, oh, he's a very intellectual artist, or no, he's very emotional or very romantic. And you're going like, what? Like, what are we talking about? So let me just kind of break down what these terms sort of mean so that when you guys use them, like, oh, people are like, oh, they're so impressed by your vocabulary for art. Okay, and you're like, oh, you can be one of those like really highly flighty, tooty woody, like art gallery people after all of this. Okay, so the classical approach, also known as intellectual, it emphasizes design and composition. So it's very cool and analytical, very scientific, involves rules and restrictions. There is this emphasis very much so on the neat and cleanness of the artwork and its arrangements. Very interested in proper proportions. Okay. The romantic approach here is also known as emotional. It's always expressionistic, makes a strong personal statement, uses symbolism, active and colorful interpretations. There's a lot of violent and active movements in a lot of these pieces. There's often distortions, bright, vivid colors, strong interest in nature, little concern for design, so a little less interest for rules, basically. So guys, which one sounds more exciting? Classical approach or romantic approach? I'll be honest, guys, the romantic sounds a little more exciting. Sounds like a little bit more fun. Okay, so yes, Aaron, I agree with you. All right, so art approach. What art approach did the artist use? So often when we are looking at a piece of art, we kind of have to ask these sort of questions, right? And that's when you guys can fill in the blank for me. So if I said to, if I had a student named Mark, what do you think of this beautiful painting over here? And he would say, Miss, it looks emotional. And I'd be like, wow, this kid knows his artwork. This is amazing, right? So now you guys can infuse your vocabulary with some of these terms, right? Okay, so you could say something like, Miss, it looks very imitational. Oh, what do you mean, Mark? It means it looks like a lot like that art piece from 1869, right? And you can go into that type of thing, right? So imitational is another approach that sometimes artists take. They try to imitate, say, the previous master that they really sort of admired. Perhaps they like to imitate a certain style that was done way back when, and they're trying to bring it into the present. There's emotionalism, of course, and there's formalism, which is basically art that focuses most on design elements to look interesting. Okay. All right, so where to begin when discussing art? Subject matter. So often I ask students, just tell me what you see. You have to approach the approach of the subject matter, whether it's imitationalism, emotionalism, or formalism. Is it abstracted? Is it ambiguous? Right? We're not really sure what is being abstracted, in other words. Is it a cityscape? Is it imaginary? Is it man-made, urban, etc.? Okay. Is the art piece of an interior? Does it look domestic? Is it a landscape? Is it still life? Or is there a great use of color? Okay. So where to begin when discussing art? For the purpose of the work, why do you think the artist created this work? Is it just for beauty? Is it to commemorate something? Is it propaganda, intense emotion? Is there a religious or spiritual purpose with the artwork? Is it documenting something, or is it trying to tell a story? Okay. All right, so some technical terms. So can you identify any of the techniques used? So that's another thing that when we're looking at a piece of art, we want to try and identify. Is this artist using oil? Are they using acrylic, fresco, watercolor, ink? Are they using a lino cut, silk screening, optical mixing, pointillism, divisionism, impasto, blended, smooth, planes, underpainting, glazes, washes, dry brush, stippling, hatching, layered, flat Renaissance terms, chiaroscuro, sfumato, or it can keep going, guys. I try to give myself that challenge just to see how fast I can go through that. But anyway, guys, these are all techniques that artists can use in a piece of artwork. And your ability to sort of identify them and talk about them is really a showing of your skill as an artist and your dedication, your passion, and just your sense of awareness really shows here. Okay, so these are a whole bunch of things that different artists can use to create something really, really interesting, whether it be on a canvas, whether it's something three-dimensional, whatever it is, okay? All right, so we can also talk about even how it's composed, like the composition. I'm not sure, guys, if you have in the past, say in grade 9 or 10, you were ever taught to how to compose composition in terms of still life. I don't know if your teachers in the past always said, you know, if you try to put objects in a certain spot, you can almost create this sort of triangular composition, which looks very aesthetically appealing. Okay, so that's just an example. There's often sometimes discussion about mark making in terms of how do they use their paintbrushes? What are their drawing strokes like? Are some of their lines thin or some of them thick? Okay. Are they blended, smooth? Are they thick, thin, bold, timid, heavy, light, edgy, smooth? Okay. Glazes, washes, dry brush, stippling, hatching, splattered, layered, flat. Are they precise, refined, regular, straight, systematic, quick, sketchy, and even irregular, vigorous, regularity, patterned? Okay, so these are just some terms, right? I'm just touching the surface here. All right, so here we have 3 paintings, okay? And these are 3 paintings from the Expressionist style. What words would you guys use to describe these 3 paintings just looking at them? Tammy, expressive, excellent. Yep, very expressive. Sorry guys, I have the sun in my eyes. This is not a good idea. Okay, that's better. Stylized, scary, Neroy. Okay, scary, fair enough. Okay, weird, Erin. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that's your opinion. All right, so a lot with these paintings here that we see, for me, the word that comes to mind is bold, right? Very strong colors that are used here. And that is something that a lot of expressionists like to use, not all of them, of course, but many of them who wanted to make a statement and sort of get your attention. Bold color use, bold shapes, even just how they painted, right? If we look at this first one right here, right? Really bold and elaborate brushstrokes, not really trying to be neat about it at all. Kind of looks kind of aggressive too. All right. Just looking at the chat just to see what other people are saying. Vivid, multicolor, excellent. Yep. Very true. Okay. These are other examples. They are also examples of expressionism. However, are they as bright and colorful as these? No, they're a lot more dull. A lot more like there's black, white, gray. Okay, but still it's very expressionistic just by looking at how things are drawn, how things are painted, their color choices. You can get a sense of emotion just looking at these pieces here as well. Okay, so how is this different from Impressionism and Post-Impressionism? That's what we focused on yesterday. So the work is intended to come from within the artist, not what the artist sees, okay? So that's a major difference. For artists like, say, Van Gogh that we talked about yesterday for Post-Impressionism, at the end of the day, Van Gogh, for the most part, was still painting what he saw in front of him, but he was infusing some emotion into it, his own little personality into a lot of his artwork. With Expressionism, it was more, there wasn't much interest necessarily in always depicting what was there. It was their interpretation and also putting their influence in whatever we saw or as the viewer of their artwork. Okay, so they had much more control. They were really sort of wanting to take control of what they put there, what they created, because they were after an emotion. They were after expressing who they are as artists and their intent. Okay, so critique of the work was based more on the emotion created rather than the composition it created. All right, so let's watch this little video about Expressionism to help us understand it a little bit better.
Expressionism became commonly used in Germany around 1910 to describe avant-garde art of the time. Expressionist art grew out of the work of symbolist artists such as Paul Gauguin, Edvard Munch, and Vincent van Gogh. Feelings were emphasised above all else. Expression over impression. Expressionism over impressionism. Artists associated with Expressionism emerged in centres across Germany and Austria. In Dresden, a group of artists called themselves Die Brücke, or the Bridge, seeing their art as the bridge into the future as they freed themselves of the constraints of tradition. Ernst Ludwig Kirchner was a key member of the Bridge. This early painting by him is highly decorative as well as expressive. The bold use of colour and exaggerated form express the exotic qualities of the subject. A Japanese theatre group performing in Dresden. Something new and exotic, escaping from tradition. Emil Nolde, a member of the Bridge for a short while, was a frequent visitor to the Ethnographic Museum in Berlin. This painting looks forward to his trip in 1914 to the South Pacific. The heavy brushstrokes, shadowy figure, and use of deep red gives the viewer a sense of foreboding. Like Kirchner, Nold was interested in trying to escape traditional artistic forms and in drawing inspiration from non-Western culture. Another expressionist group developed in Munich at the same time as the Bridge. This group, called Der Blaue Reiter, or the Blue Rider, took its name from a painting by Wassily Kandinsky. The art of the group emphasised the spiritual over the earthbound. After the First World War, a new wave of artists came to prominence, rejecting the outpouring of emotions of expressionist art and turned to a matter-of-fact depiction of the world. The new movement was known as New Objectivity. George Grosz, who was associated with New Objectivity, claimed it revealed to the oppressed the true faces of their oppressors, ugly, corrupt. In time, though, expressionists and realists who did confront the brutality of the modern industrialised world would find themselves victims of it. Weimar Germany embraced avant-garde cinema, art, architecture and theatre, but this came to an abrupt end in 1933, when Hitler's Nazi Party came to power. The Nazis labelled modern art degenerate art. Expressionists and other avant-garde art, like New Objectivity, was censored for not upholding what they saw as German values. Once classified as degenerate, many artists went into exile abroad. Kirchner killed himself. Expressionists continued, though, in a fragmented way, to create emotive work. Their influence survived in later art movements like Abstract Expressionism and Neo-Expressionism. After the Second World War, Expressionism was rediscovered and reclaimed in Germany as part of its true heritage. In the 1970s and 1980s in Germany, several artists looked back at the Expressionist forerunners and were themselves dubbed Neo-Expressionists. Georg Baselitz was one such artist. Censorship and persecution couldn't stop the influence of these avant-garde artists. But if art is born from the human spirit, should we really be surprised?
All right, so there's a great little video about Expressionism, just introducing you and giving you some context. All right, so Expressionism art common characteristics. So expression artists try to develop an individual style of painting. Therefore, it is difficult to group them with common characteristics in the technique of the work. So Expressionism art refers to a common attitude / philosophy of art. Here's a list of some common ideas that of what art should be. All right, so they believe that there should be intense emotion. They're not interested in capturing naturalism. There's often a personal meaning and connection. There's a common theme of urban life, prostitutes, war, pain, suffering, and sorrow. So kind of like the hard and meaningful and sort of dreary topics, right, are generally the areas that expressionists went to, the tough stuff, like the stuff that people are uncomfortable with feeling, or even just sort of exploring taboo topics. right? Just to kind of push the envelope, just to see what kind of reaction they're going to get from people and the viewer. All right, so they're not trying to capture effects of light anymore. They're not really interested in that. Swirly and swaying brushstrokes meant to represent the turbulent lives and anxieties of the modern world. All right, so here, guys, I'm going to be talking about a little bit of the various expressionist groups. All right, so the first group is Die Brücke, the bridge. That's what it means. It originates in Germany and rejected the academic way of studying art. The sharp and sometimes violently clashing colors gives the jolt to the viewer. So that's something that we see here. And those are some examples of what I showed you in that first slide of those three paintings side by side that were very bold and very vivid in their color choices. And really the whole purpose of that was to get an emotional reaction, right? That's what they were after, the Expressionists. So the name Die Brücke was chosen to indicate the group's desire to bridge the past and the present. They combine inspiration of past artists like Dürer, Grunwald, with modern expressive colorists like Vincent van Gogh, Edvard Munch, okay, and Henri Matisse. Right, so there's a close-up of that piece. All right, so here is another group, and it was mentioned in that little video. Der Blaue Reiter, the Blue Rider, originates in Germany after the bridge. So there's a lot of color and form, carried concrete spiritual values, drew parallels between painting and music. The name Der Blaue Reiter referred to Kandinsky and Marx's belief that blue was the most spiritual color and that the rider symbolized the ability to move beyond. Okay, so guys, the Expressionist period is when we start to associate color with emotions and feelings. I know when I'm teaching art in, say, grade 9 or 10, I always do like color exercises with them. Guys, what color, sorry, when you're angry, what color would you use to sort of express that emotion, right? And then, students are like, this, I would use red. Okay, cool. So this sort of stems back to the Expressionist period where we're kind of exploring our emotions and how do we represent them? Okay, so that's where that sort of begins. Let's move on to the next thing here. The next group is Fauvism. So it originated in France between 1901 and 1906. There's a lot of bold distortions, violent color, bright hot colors, vigorous brushstrokes. It's a critique, a critic describes the art as works of wild beasts. The French term is fauve, so that's where Fauvism starts. So it's the artwork of those wild beasts. Anyway, it's also inspired by Van Gogh and Gauguin. Okay, so this painting right here that we see is by Henri Matisse. And I'm a huge fan of some of his artwork. Very expressive. All right, Edvard Munch. I think we might recognize this piece of art right over here that we see on this video. Does anybody know what that piece is called? Okay, it's become a real synonymous really with pop culture. We see it a lot in pop culture. Does anyone know what that's called? Screaming Woman, you're close. It's called The Scream. Yes, thank you, Iris. Okay, so yes. This here is Edvard Munch, the painter. So this little video here just gives us a little bit of a background into his story. Not a lot of people know much about him. They know a lot of his artwork. But just by looking at his portrait over here, what conclusion, guys, would you make about this artist? How would you describe him? Or, I don't know, what kind of mood is reflected in this portrait here when you look at this painting of him? Do you think he's a happy guy? He looks sad and shocked. Okay, very good. Any other words come to mind, guys, when you look at his portrait? If you try to figure out who he is as a person? And we're just going off of what we see, but these are kind of the things that you want to sort of build as an artist, right? Is your ability to analyze and use sort of a critical analysis here. He kind of looks smart. Fair enough, Tamia. Jennifer, he looks miserable. I agree. He looks dapper, right, Matthew? Fair enough. He looks like a dapper, mysterious, miserable individual. I think that's a good combination of all the words I see here in the chat. So that's accurate, I think. So let's hear a little bit more about him in this quick video. Oops.
Edvard Munch was born on December 12, 1863 in Norway. Tragedy fell early on Munch with the loss of his mother. He was just 5 years old when she died of tuberculosis. The young boy saw illness spread throughout his family. His dearly loved elder sister was also taken from him by tuberculosis. Edvard's sister Laura, 4 years his junior, developed a schizoaffective illness during her adolescence and required intermittent, lifelong hospitalizations. His father had fits of madness and would tell his children that their mother was crying in heaven because of their misbehavior. Edvard, the little boy, already enduring so much pain and grief, began to have nightmares and visions of death. As a teenager, Munch enrolled into an engineering course, but realized quickly that this was not the life for him. He needed an outlet to express his troubled, yearning emotions. He needed art. He began formal study at the Royal School of Art and Design and started working in a studio he rented with his friends. After traveling to Paris with the help of a scholarship, Munch returned to Oslo and started working on new paintings. He painted The Sick Child, revisiting the grief of losing his sister and marking a new era in his work, clearly establishing himself as an artist to watch for. When Edvard was 26, he lost his father. The emotions he expressed in his work became more intense than ever before, and he entered into one of his most productive periods as an artist. But it was drowned out by the downward spiral of drinking, resulting in mental and physical collapse. Edvard refused to give in to misfortune and checked himself into a sanitarium, where he successfully regained a measure of control over his drinking. By 1909, he returned to the artistic world as a changed man, and his work, more vibrant and colorful, seemed less bleak and pessimistic than before. To some extent, it seems, Edvard had made peace with his demons. He continued to work right up until his death in 1944, after which his personal collection of paintings were donated to the Norwegian government. Even in death, the artist's commitment to art, rather than monetary gain, became evident, given that he willed all of his pictures and notes to the city of Oslo, rather than leaving them to his family. A childhood filled with tragedy did not deter Edvard Munch from toiling for success in his chosen profession. Instead, he channeled his intense emotional trauma into his work. For as long as I can remember, I have suffered from a deep feeling of anxiety, which I have tried to express in my art.
All right, so there is a little snapshot of Edvard Munch in his life, which is very, very sad. But what I always respected about him is that he still tried to channel that pain, that sadness, that sorrow into something like art, right? Where we can look at it, we can understand it, we can somewhat relate to that, maybe that darkness, that anxiety, that stress that he sort of felt throughout his life. Um, I know for me, art is a good outlet just in general when dealing with stress. I'm not sure if it does that for you guys as well. But I think it just kind of helps us relax a little bit more and kind of just almost like deal with certain things. And I think for Edvard Munch, art was something that helped him through a great deal. Okay. I'm just checking the chat here. I know, yes, it's a very sad story, and it's unfortunate that it started off so young with his childhood there. Okay, so anyway, I have a lot of compassion for Edvard Munch, and I do appreciate the stories he was trying to tell in his art pieces. All right, so now that we look at some of his artwork, now that we know a little bit about the man, we know now what we're seeing in some of these paintings, right? That dreadfulness, that anxiety, that stress, the sadness, the dreariness. All right, and they're very much depicted in a lot of his pieces that we see here. Okay. Okay, so we're going to come back to Edvard de Munch, sorry, a little bit later. Okay, so let's move on to Henri Matisse. All right, now Henri Matisse, I've always loved him and I always loved his style of art. It's very bold, very colorful, and very stylistic. All right. Henri Matisse, this particular painting was done, that you see here was done oil on canvas. He used very intense colors, as I mentioned, and the use of flat planes of color. All right, so if you notice here, a lot of his visuals, a lot of his imagery is very flat. He's not really interested in capturing depth all that accurately, but that's what he's aiming for here. All right, so about the work. So Henri Matisse is part of that wild beast movement called Fauvism. And again, it's all about bold color, even using violent color. So maybe colors that even clash within the same canvas or the same painting. And that's something that he enjoyed exploring. So here's even more, I know, right? Can you say color clash? It's like, whoa, what's happening over here? It's kind of intense, but that was his aim. All right, so Henri Matisse, this is called the Red Studio. All right, oil on canvas. Key elements, simplified form, saturated colors, flatness of color, strong feelings, personal expression. So he is, like I said, part of the Fauvism movement, but he's based, that grandfather clock is the central element in this, in this image here. All right, and there's no arms, a sense of time being suspended. Okay. All right. Let's go back to here, discussion 1. All right, guys, so that's pretty much it with just my introduction to you of what Expressionism is, okay? So for Expressionism later today when we're doing our discussion, for discussion 1, in the work of Edvard Munch, there's a madness and a chaos to his work, and you can't help but feel something when you see it. So how does he achieve this in his pieces? So on Jamboard later, guys, you're going to tell me how he achieves chaos, madness, sadness, all of those things in his paintings, okay? So you can look at some of them. I think I have more here. So how does he achieve it? What does he do as an artist to represent that madness, that sadness, that angst that he feels inside? Okay, I'm not going to give any clues. I'm not going to direct you. I just want to hear from you. How do you think he achieved this in most of his pieces? Okay, so just keep that in mind for later. Here's some more of his pieces there. All right. Now, the next part of what I'm going to be talking about today is abstract expressionism. Okay, so basically, guys, this is what we would call the abstract period, where abstract art was created and developed. All right, just checking the chat here to see if there's any other commentary. Okay, there we go. All right, so abstract expressionism is both emotional and formal, believe it or not. This movement began in New York after World War II, and it shows a desire to hold on to humanity during an insane time. It's rooted in the styles of Kandinsky and Gorky from Europe. It is both abstract/formal, so it is without recognizable subject matter, and it is expressive and emotional. So basically what they're saying, guys, is that there's still a technical aspect to abstract painting, believe it or not. Doesn't look like it, but they're arguing that there is. Okay, so that's why they're saying it's both emotional and intellectual at the same time, or formal, sorry. So also known as action painting, it emphasizes energy, action, and kineticism, kinetic energy. All right, so the theory. The image is the result of creative process, not a preconceived idea. So new approaches, methods were used to create this effect. There's a major debate at this time. What is art? Okay, and this is the big, big question, guys, especially during the abstract period, right? Because you have people that are splattering paint on canvases and basically just questioning, so like what makes, who do you think you are that you can decide what art is, right? Like that's basically what they're doing. They're challenging, they're trying to rebel against these ideals of, so is art like a painting done by Michelangelo, like that's art, or is it like something I can splatter on a canvas and that's also art? Like what is art? So that's basically the debate that they're having at this time. It's sort of a cool period in art as well because they're challenging all of these ideas. All right, so let's watch this cool video about abstract expressionism, and then we're going to talk a little bit about it. It's kind of a controversial
If you visit a museum with a collection of modern and contemporary art, you're likely to see works that sometimes elicit the response, "My cat could make that, so how is it art?" A movement called Abstract Expressionism, also known as the New York School, gets this reaction particularly often. Abstract Expressionism started in 1943 and developed after the end of World War II. It's characterized by large, primarily abstract paintings, all over compositions without clear focal points, and sweeping swaths of paint embodying and eliciting emotions. The group of artists who are considered abstract expressionists includes Barnett Newman with his existential zips, William de Kooning, famous for his travestied women, Helen Frankenthaler, who created soak stains, and others. But perhaps the most famous, influential, and head-scratching one was Jackson Pollock. Most of his paintings are immediately recognizable. They feature tangled messes of lines of paint bouncing around in every direction on the canvas. And sure, these fields of chaos are big and impressive. But what's so great about them? Didn't he just drip the paint at random? Can't anyone do that? Well, the answer to these questions is both yes and no. While Pollock implemented a technique anyone is technically capable of, regardless of artistic training, only he could have made his paintings. This paradox relates to his work's roots in the surrealist automatic drawings of André Masson and others. These surrealists supposedly drew directly from the unconscious to reveal truths hidden within their minds. Occasionally, instead of picturing something and then drawing it, they let their hands move automatically and would later tease out familiar figures that appeared in the scribbles. And after Pollock moved away from representation, he made drip or action paintings, following a similar premise. Though he developed a signature technique and never looked for images or messages hidden in the works. First, he took the canvas off of the easel and laid it on the floor, a subversive act in itself. Then, in a controlled dance, he stepped all around the canvas, dripping industrial paint onto it from stirrers and other tools, changing speed and direction to control how the paint made contact with the surface. These movements, like the surrealist scribbles, were supposedly born out of Pollock's subconscious. But unlike the surrealists, whose pictures represented the mind's hidden contents, Pollock supposedly made physical manifestations of his psyche. His paintings are themselves signatures of his mind. In theory, anyone could make a painting that is an imprint of their mind. So why is Pollock so special? Well, it's important to remember that while anyone could have done what he did, he and the rest of the New York school were the ones who actually did it. They destroyed conventions of painting that had stood for centuries, forcing the art world to rethink them entirely. But one last reason why Jackson Pollock's work has stayed prominent stems from the specific objects he made, which embody fascinating contradictions. For instance, while Pollock's process resulted in radically flat painted surfaces, the web of painted lines can create the illusion of an infinite, layered depth when examined up close. And the chaos of this tangled mess seems to defy all control, but it's actually the product of a deliberate, though not pre-planned process. These characteristics made Pollock into a celebrity, and within art history, they also elevated him to the mythified status of the genius artist as hero. So rather than evening the playing field for all creative minds, his work unfortunately reinforced a long-standing elitist aspect of art. Elitist, innovative, whatever you choose to call it, the history embedded in abstract expressionism is one that no cat, however talented, can claim.
right, guys. So what do you think of that? What do you think of Jackson Pollock and his artwork? How many of you have seen this type of art before? Whether you've seen it at a museum, whether you've gone to a gallery in the past, and you've seen something like this, what has always been your reaction to it? And just be honest, what was your guttural response? Okay, fair enough, Matthew. So I like what you wrote, so that I know that there's something to it, but you're not entirely sure, right? You don't entirely understand sort of the technique, the approach, and all of that. That's fair. Um, what I always find amusing, right? My mom is a math and science high school teacher, or at least she was. She's now retired. And so I was, the artsy kid in the family. Like, and my dad studied math in university, so God knows where my artistic talent came, because I'm totally clueless as to how that happened. Anyway, I remember going to like art galleries with my mom, and we would get to like the modern art section, and we'd get to like abstract art, and that's where she was just lost. She was kind of like one of those people, like I could have done that when I was 4. Like, give me, what is this, right? And she'd be very critical. She didn't, she had no interest whatsoever about that kind of artwork, because in her brain, what skill is that? So, she's always someone that I have in the back of my mind. So her understanding of what art is very different than, say, someone else's. And that's the interesting sort of discussion that can happen, is what is art? What do you consider art to be? How about you? And you can have a whole debate about it. But it is very interesting. And it's always interesting to hear people's points of view, because people can get really heated also defending on their point of view as well. All right, so let's go to the next part here, right? So guys, this is the last part. So we're going to be discussing 2 things today. We're going to talk about Edvard Munch and his art pieces, and we're going to discuss abstract expressionism with Jackson Pollock. All right, so for this discussion, we are going to read the thoughts of art critic Ben Cohen on the artist Jackson Pollock. So let's see what he has to say. Pollock's most famous piece, number 5, is spastic, devoid of any rhyme or reason, and completely ignorant of color theory. To me, it seems to have taken about as much creativity to make as its title. All right, so he's poking fun of, like, okay, so this is the magnificent creation. Oh, and you called it number 5. That's your title. Wow. Okay. Yet in 2006, it was purchased from. It was purchased for a record $140 million. Guys, this painting is worth $140 million. Okay, making it the second most expensive painting ever sold. Wow. It's infuriating that this kaleidoscopic vomit has exceeded true masterpieces like Gustav Klimt's Adele. Bloch-Bauer's was 135 million. And Titian's The Portrait of Alfonso Diavelas, which was worth 70 million in value, while still not in league with the truly priceless works like Salvador Dali's The Persistence of Memory, Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night, or Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. It's nothing short of abhorrent that something so uninteresting could even approach them in desirability. I don't think the Mona Lisa is particularly interesting either, but that's a debate for another day. Okay, so for this discussion, guys, do you agree with what Ben Cohen shared about the artist Jackson Pollock, or do you feel differently? In our discussion today, state your opinion and then explain your thoughts on the artist, their work, and how you feel about abstract art as a whole. Okay, so guys, you can share your opinions and how you feel about this, all right? But of course, when we're having a discussion, always be respectful of everybody else's opinion and everybody else's point of view. I'm always interested in what people sort of explain in terms of why they like something or why they don't like something, because there's always something interesting that I have never maybe even considered. when looking at a piece of art. So I always learn something new, especially when I hear other points of view. Okay, so let me just check the chat here. Aaron. Okay, let's start with Naveen. Okay, so why do people throw paint on paper and call it art? Good. Well, that's a question we can discuss in the discussion piece for sure, Naveen. Imagine looking at this and saying, yes, 135 million. I thought it was worth $140 until you said million. Fair enough, Naveen. Guys, there could be a whole bunch of discussions on how much money is sort of given towards these pieces. If I was going to spend millions of dollars, I'd probably spend it personally after my favorite artist of all time, which would be Vincent van Gogh. He's like my all-time fave. So I'd probably spend some $1 million on that. I don't think I'd be spending it personally. I'm going to reveal how I feel on abstract art. For me, it doesn't really do anything for me, but that's just my personal opinion. Okay, so it's on the record. All right. Anyway, guys, Tam, you're hilarious. Would an art school accept me if I submitted this? Look at you, Tam. You're always trying to figure out. You know what? If it's done well, I don't see how they couldn't, right? I don't think they would want a replication of the exact same thing because then they know that you're trying to imitate Pollock. But abstract art, sure, you could give it a try and do something really kind of interesting. See where it gets you. I don't know. Maybe it'll be worth 140 million one day. Who knows? So anyway, guys, what we're going to do now is I'm going to exit this. I'm going to show you what we're going to be doing for the next while. We're going to go on Jamboard for some discussions. Okay, so kind of like yesterday, I'm going to put you guys into groups. All right, you're going to discuss two things, right? So you're going to discuss Edvard Munch and the Pollock topic. Okay, so how about this, guys? What do you think if we get this done and over with? I put you guys in your breakout rooms. You start putting your commentary on here, and then we end class earlier today instead of having another check-in. Oh, yes, he's a great artist. Okay, so, all right. So, guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you guys into your breakout rooms now. Okay. And if you need to go to like the washroom or you want to go grab a drink, whatever, go do that now as I put the breakout rooms together. Okay. And then just come back. And then once you see which room you're in, then you can start adding your commentary and all of that. And in about, let's say maybe 1:40, okay, we'll start the actual, I'll start meeting you guys in the discussion groups. We'll facilitate it, it'll be over, and then you guys can just leave the meeting for the day and we'll end earlier today, okay? I think that's probably just a better flow instead of this break and then come back and all this other stuff, okay? So let me do that and I'll see you guys soon.